All of the amendments in this group, I think, are also from People for Profit Solidarity. Should I move them all? 14, 23, yes, 34, yes, 40,
yeah.
42, 60, 61, and 103.
Yes, thank you.
I'll move them. Okay, so although we discussed a lot of this in the last more general discussion, which was to do with the title, this is the one that actually deals with us setting out the alternative approach which we feel should have been pursued with the Land Development Agency, namely to make it a land assembly agency to create that pipeline of land that is necessary in order to ensure the supply of public and affordable housing by local authorities, primarily, and AHBs and not-for-profit bodies, but to leave the development of those lands to the local authorities and to prevent the Land Development Agency, and this is an important point, from essentially operating as a commercial entity. This speaks to a major concern we have about the whole conception the government have of the Land Development Agency. And to use an analogy, Minister, see, I remember the debates at the time, about NAMA and what NAMA was going to achieve and why it was such a good idea. But as time went on, it became increasingly apparent that NAMA's problem in terms of delivering, which some of us thought, even though we didn't like the idea of NAMA in the first place, that it could have and should have helped deliver public and affordable housing on the huge property portfolio it had. But when NAMA used to come into the Finance Committee, they used to say, well, basically that's not our mandate. I mean, as a sort of subsidiary objective, way down its list of priorities, it would try and identify some houses for public housing. In the end, I think only about 2,000 land or property amounting to about 2,000 actually got transferred over to local authorities. But by and large, NAMA's mandate was set from the outset, and its mandate was to recover the money that was put into it, and therefore it had an interest in reflating the property market. The consequence of that, in my opinion, has turned out to be quite disastrous, because NAMA can turn around and say, oh, look, we've generated so many billion, we've got a surplus over and above what was projected. But if you take it in the round, what has the consequence been? Much of the land that it disposed of has been handed over to private interests who had no interest whatsoever in developing the public and affordable housing we actually need, but actually have played a very significant part in driving up the cost of housing to the unaffordable levels it's currently at. And it was hardwired in to the mandate that was set down in the first place. And this is similarly, to my mind, the problem with the Land Development Agency, because what goes into this legislation and what doesn't go into this legislation will essentially determine the outcome of the Land Development Agency. And by the way, that does relate to the debate we had in the earlier session about the guillotine and so on. You see, Deputy McAuliffe says, we discussed all these matters at committee stage, and therefore it doesn't matter that there's a guillotine at report stage. Well, I'm sorry, there is a legislative process, and the whole point of a discussion at a committee stage is that we take on board each other's points in terms of the amendments, in terms of the different sections of the bill, and then we come forward at this stage with further amendments based on that discussion. But most of our amendments will not be reached. All of your amendments will pass once the guillotine comes down. That's the truth, right? And some of the key issues that should be scrutinised will not be scrutinised. And indeed, to some extent, I mean, what I think many of us wanted to achieve is to actually ring the alarm bells about this, because I don't think there's been enough digging into the detail in public discourse and debate. Sure, we did it at committee to some degree, but to be honest, I think there's still a lot of confusion about what the Land Development Agency is actually going to do. And one of our key concerns, which these amendments in this grouping try to rule out, is to prevent it engaging in commercial activities. That's not its job. But this legislation allows it to do that. Just like NAMA ended up essentially operating as a sort of business trying to recover its investment and generate a surplus, even if that had, in my opinion, quite dire consequences in terms of the wider housing market and essentially handing back control of the land bank, the land suitable for developing housing, back to these big investment funds that bought up all those portfolios from NAMA. This group of amendments also require that in terms of the objectives, the purposes of the bill will be to deliver solely public and affordable housing and limits the role of the agency to make land available to local authorities to provide the public and affordable housing and ensures that the LDA will be fully publicly owned and controlled. And, you know, owned, yes, controlled, no, right? That's the problem with a lot of these quangos. Owned, yes, controlled, no. And I've dealt with it so many times. And then you have all these issues of commercial sensitivity because you're in deals with private finance and so on, and we can't actually find out what's being done, but it's operating to a different set of objectives and priorities to the ones that might be set by local authorities, by local communities in terms of what their needs are, because always it's looking at the deals it's doing with private finance, completely distorting what the objectives of such an agency should be. And moving it away, and just last sentence, Count Corla, moving it away from what it could and should be doing, which is aggressively assembling the land we need and ensuring it's serviced to service local authorities to deliver public housing as they always have done in the past.
O'Brien, please.